Rebecca Martinez had dreamed of this moment for 3 years. Standing in the driveway of her first home, keys warm in her palm, she couldn't stop smiling. The modest 2-bedroom house on Paradise Drive wasn't much to look at. Faded blue siding, a front porch that sagged slightly on the left side, and a lawn that had seen better days. But it was hers. At 28, Rebecca had finally scraped together enough for a down payment after working double shifts as a pediatric nurse. Every missed dinner with friends, every weekend spent picking up extra hours at the hospital had led to this moment. Her elderly parents had driven down from Phoenix to help her move in, and her younger brother Marcus was somewhere inside, probably already claiming the spare bedroom for his weekend visits. "Mija, this neighborhood looks so peaceful," her mother said, surveying the tree-lined street. "Look at all these beautiful gardens." Rebecca nodded, breathing in the scent of jasmine and fresh-cut grass. Paradise Drive lived up to its name. Children's. Bicycles sat in neat driveways, American flags hung from several porches, and the sound of a lawnmower hummed somewhere in the distance. After years of cramped apartment living with paper-thin walls and neighbors who played music until 3 in the morning, this felt like stepping into a Norman Rockwell painting. That's when she first saw her. The woman emerged from the house directly, across the street like she'd been watching from behind her pristine white curtains. She was probably in her mid-40s, with shoulder-length blonde hair styled in the kind of precise bob that required weekly salon visits. Her outfit, white capri pants, a coral-colored blouse, and spotless tennis shoes, screamed homeowners. Association president. She marched across the street with the determined stride of someone who had important things to discuss. "Hello there," the woman called out, her voice carrying that particular tone Rebecca recognized from difficult patients' families, sweet on the surface but with steel underneath. "I'm Linda Hoffman from across the street. Are you renting or—" "Buying?" "Buying," Rebecca replied, extending her hand. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. Nice to meet you." Linda's handshake was brief and surprisingly firm. Her pale blue eyes swept over Rebecca's faded jeans and moving truck with what looked like calculation. "How wonderful. We don't get many new homeowners on this street. Most people can't afford the property values anymore." There was something in the way Linda emphasized afford that made Rebecca's smile falter slightly. But before she could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway, carrying a box marked kitchen stuff in Rebecca's messy handwriting. "This box is heavy as hell, Becca. What did you pack in here, Rox?" He paused when he noticed Linda, then gave his trademark grin. "Oh, hey, I'm Marcus, the brother and designated heavy lifter." Linda's expression grew even more rigid. "I see. Well, I hope you understand that Paradise Drive is a quiet, family-oriented neighborhood. We have noise ordinances and community standards that we take very seriously." "Of course," Rebecca said quickly, sensing tension she didn't quite understand. "I work night shifts at the hospital, so I definitely appreciate quiet." "The hospital?" Linda's eyebrows rose. "Which one?" "Children's Medical Center downtown. I'm a pediatric nurse." For a moment, Linda's expression softened, as if being a nurse earned Rebecca some small measure of approval, but it was brief. "Well, that's admirable. I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining property values and neighborhood standards then. Some of us have lived here for over 15 years and have worked very hard to keep this area respectable." Rebecca nodded, though something about Linda's tone made her uncomfortable. The woman was saying all the right words, but there was an undercurrent she couldn't quite identify. "Speaking of standards," Linda continued, glancing at Rebecca's old Honda Civic with its dented bumper and faded paint, "you'll want to review the HOA guidelines about vehicle maintenance and parking. We don't allow cars to sit unmoved for extended periods, and anything that's not, well, presentable needs to be kept in the garage." Heat crept up Rebecca's neck. She'd saved every penny for this house, which meant her car had been neglected for months. But it ran perfectly fine, and she'd never heard of HOA rules about car appearances. "I don't think this neighborhood has An HOA, Rebecca said carefully. My realtor didn't mention one. Linda's smile became razor thin. No formal HOA, but we have community standards that we've maintained through informal agreements. I'm sure you want to fit in with your neighbors. Marcus appeared again, this time carrying Rebecca's beloved cactus garden, a collection of succulents she'd been nurturing for years. Linda's gaze fixed on them like they were personally offensive. Are those going in the front yard? She asked. I was thinking about it, Rebecca replied. Why? Well, they're rather unusual for this neighborhood. Most of us prefer traditional landscaping. Roses, perhaps, or a nice lawn. Something that complements the existing aesthetic. Rebecca felt her first flash of real irritation. They're just plants. Of course. I'm just suggesting that you might want to consider how your choices affect the overall appearance of the street. Property values, you know. We all have investments to protect. Before Rebecca could respond, Linda was already backing away, her mission apparently complete. Well, I'll let you get back to moving. Welcome to the neighborhood, Rebecca. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other. As Linda disappeared back into her house, Rebecca stood in her driveway feeling like she'd just been politely threatened, though she couldn't quite put her finger on how. What was that about? Marcus asked, setting down the cactus box. I'm not. Sure, Rebecca admitted, watching Linda's front door close with a decisive click. But I have a feeling I just met the neighborhood watch. Her mother emerged from the house having missed the entire exchange. What a lovely street, Mija. Everyone seems so friendly. Rebecca forced a smile, but her eyes drifted back to Linda's house. Through the front window she could swear she saw the curtains move, as if someone was still watching. The dream of peaceful suburban life suddenly felt a little less certain, and she hadn't even finished unpacking her first box. That night, as Rebecca lay on an air mattress surrounded by towers of cardboard boxes, she told herself she was overreacting. Linda was probably just a concerned neighbor trying to maintain community standards. Maybe she'd come across as territorial, but her heart was probably in the right place. She had no way of knowing that across the street, Linda Hoffman was already making a list of violations she'd observed in less than 4 hours. An unsightly vehicle, inappropriate plants, and what she was certain would be undesirable visitors based on Marcus's appearance. In Linda's mind, Rebecca Martinez was already a problem that needed to be managed. The war for Paradise Drive was about to begin, though only one side knew it yet. Rebecca's first week on Paradise Drive passed quietly enough. She worked 3 12-hour shifts at the hospital, came home exhausted, and spent her off days slowly unpacking boxes and trying to make the house feel like home. Her cactus garden found a sunny spot by the front porch, and she'd even managed to get her ancient lawnmower started long enough to trim the overgrown grass. She was beginning to think her first encounter with Linda had been a fluke. Maybe just neighborhood jitters about change. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday morning when she came home from her night shift to find a typed letter tucked under her windshield wiper. Dear new resident, it has come to our attention that several violations of community standards have occurred at your property. Please address the following issues within 72 hours. My goodness. Vehicle maintenance. Your automobile shows visible damage and paint deterioration that negatively impacts neighborhood aesthetics. Ooh. Landscaping. The desert plants in your front yard are inconsistent with the established gardening theme of Paradise Drive. Lawn care. Your grass exceeds the recommended height of 2.5 inches. Noise disturbance. Lawn mowing before 9 a.m. on weekends is prohibited. Failure to comply may result in further action. We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining our community's high standards. Sincerely, Paradise Drive. Neighborhood. Committee. Rebecca read the letter twice, her exhaustion replaced by a surge of anger. She'd mowed her lawn at 8:30 on Saturday morning, hardly the crack of dawn, and who decided desert plants were inappropriate. This was Arizona, for crying out loud. She looked across the street and saw Linda's pristine front yard with its perfectly manicured roses and emerald green lawn that must cost a fortune to maintain in the desert heat. Linda was nowhere to be seen, but Rebecca had a strong suspicion about who constituted the neighborhood committee. That evening, Rebecca walked down the street and knocked on a few doors, introducing herself to neighbors she hadn't met yet. What she discovered made her blood boil. Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow who lived 3 houses down, had never heard of any neighborhood committee. Linda Hoffman? Mrs. Chen's weathered face creased with distaste. Oh yes, she's always complaining. About something. Last month she called the city because my granddaughter's bicycle was on the lawn overnight. Said it was an eyesore. Tom Rodriguez, a firefighter who lived 2 doors down from Rebecca, was even more direct. Linda's been terrorizing this street for years. She called code enforcement on me because my work truck was commercial-looking. It's a standard pickup with a fire department decal, for Pete's sake. Most of us just ignore her now. But she said there was a neighborhood committee. Rebecca protested. Tom snorted. Committee of 1, maybe. She appoints herself to everything. Truth is, half the street can't stand her, but she's got too much time and too much money to fight with. Armed with this information, Rebecca decided to test Linda's authority. She left her cactus garden exactly where it was, parked her car in the driveway instead of the garage, and made sure to water her plants with a hose that was clearly visible, from Linda's front window. The response was swift. On Thursday morning, Rebecca woke to find her car's windshield covered in what looked like raw eggs. The sticky mess had baked in the Arizona sun, creating a film so thick she could barely see. Through it. Worse, someone had scattered birdseed across her front yard, turning her property into a feeding frenzy for every pigeon, crow, and grackle in the neighborhood. Rebecca stood in her driveway in her pajamas, surveying the damage. Bird droppings dotted her porch, her carefully tended cactus garden was trampled, and the smell was overwhelming. Across the street, Linda's sprinklers were running, at 6 in the morning, while the woman herself stood in her doorway with a coffee mug, watching. Rebecca's distress with barely concealed satisfaction. Terrible about the vandalism, Linda called out with false sympathy. You might want to consider installing security cameras. This used to be such a safe neighborhood. Rebecca wanted to march over there and demand answers, but she forced herself to stay calm. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. If Linda wanted to play games, Rebecca would document everything. Cleaning the car took 2 hours and a trip to the hardware store for special windshield cleaner. The bird situation required a call to her brother Marcus, who drove over with a shop vacuum and industrial-strength hose. This is insane, Becca, Marcus said as they worked to clear the yard. You need to call the police. And say what? Someone threw birdseed in my yard? They'll think I'm crazy. What about the eggs on your car? Rebecca gestured toward Linda's house. No proof, no witnesses, no camera footage. She paused, an idea forming. Yet. That afternoon, Rebecca drove to an electronics store and purchased 2 wireless security cameras with motion detection and night vision. She wasn't about to let Linda's campaign of harassment escalate without evidence. Installing the cameras took most of her weekend, but by Sunday evening, Rebecca had complete coverage of her front yard, driveway, and porch. She also downloaded an app that would send alerts to her phone whenever the cameras detected movement. She didn't have to wait long. Monday morning at 5:15, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a motion alert. She opened the app and watched in real time as a figure in dark clothing crept across her front yard, scattering what looked like dog food near her porch. The person was clearly trying to stay out of view, but when they turned toward the street light, Rebecca got a clear shot of Linda's face. Got you, Rebecca whispered, saving the video to her phone. But Linda wasn't finished. Over the next few days, Rebecca's cameras captured a systematic campaign of petty sabotage. Linda moved Rebecca's trash cans into the street after pickup, making it look like Rebecca was violating city ordinances. She scattered more birdseed every few days, ensuring Rebecca's property remained a magnet for messy birds. Most infuriatingly, she called the city's code enforcement office and filed complaints about Rebecca's car, her plants, and her lawn height. The breaking point came on a Wednesday evening when Rebecca returned from work to find a citation from code enforcement tucked to her front door. Someone had reported her for having junk vehicles on her property. The citation threatened a fine of $200 if the violation wasn't corrected within 10 days. Rebecca stared at the notice, her hands shaking with rage. Her Honda wasn't pretty, but it was registered, insured, and ran perfectly. There was nothing illegal about parking it in her own driveway. But Linda had weaponized the city bureaucracy against her, knowing that fighting false citations would cost time and money Rebecca couldn't afford. That night, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, researching her options. She'd tried being reasonable. She'd tried ignoring Linda's harassment. Neither approach had worked. In fact, Linda seemed to be escalating, growing bolder with each successful attack. As Rebecca scrolled through city ordinances and tenant rights websites, she started to form a plan. Linda Hoffman clearly believed she could bully her new neighbor into submission through a combination of social pressure and bureaucratic warfare. She'd picked the wrong target. Rebecca had spent years advocating for child patients whose parents couldn't fight the system alone. She'd learned how to navigate hospital bureaucracy, insurance companies, and social services. Most importantly, she'd learned that bullies only understood one thing: consequences. If Linda wanted a war, Rebecca would give her one. But it would be fought on Rebecca's terms, with Rebecca's weapons, patience, documentation, and a deep understanding of how systems actually worked. The neighborhood committee was about to meet its match. 3 weeks into her documentation project, Rebecca had compiled a digital folder that would make any prosecutor jealous. Linda's nighttime raids were captured in crystal-clear video. Her bogus code enforcement complaints were documented with timestamps and photographic evidence. Rebecca had even started a spreadsheet tracking the correlation between Linda's harassment and her own work schedule, proving that the attacks intensified. Whenever Rebecca worked multiple night shifts and was too exhausted to immediately clean up the sabotage. But Linda was getting smarter and meaner. The escalation began with Rebecca's mail. At first, it was just small delays, packages that tracking showed as delivered but didn't appear until a day or two later. Rebecca assumed it was typical Postal Service confusion until her camera caught Linda intercepting a delivery, walking casually across the street and taking a package directly from Rebecca's porch. The video was damning. Linda looked around carefully, then picked up the box, clearly labeled with Rebecca's name and address, and carried it back to her own house. Rebecca watched the footage 3 times, her anger building with each replay. The package contained a birthday gift for her niece, a children's book she'd ordered specifically because it wouldn't arrive in stores for another month. Rebecca had planned to mail it to her brother's family in Phoenix that weekend. This wasn't petty neighborhood harassment anymore. This was mail theft, a federal crime. Rebecca printed screenshots of the video and drove to the local post office, where she filed a formal complaint with the postal inspector. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Carl who looked like he'd seen everything twice, examined the evidence with professional interest. "This is pretty clear-cut," Carl said, studying the photos. "You got good camera angles. Most people don't think to set up surveillance for package theft." "It's been an ongoing problem," Rebecca said carefully. "I wanted to make sure I had proof before filing a complaint." "Smart. We'll open an investigation, but fair warning, these cases take time. Federal bureaucracy moves slow. In the meantime, you might want to consider having packages delivered to your workplace or using a P.O. box." Rebecca nodded, but privately she was frustrated. Linda was counting on exactly this kind of bureaucratic sluggishness. By the time any official action was taken, she'd probably find new ways to escalate her campaign. That afternoon, Rebecca decided to try a different approach. She printed out several of her best surveillance photos and walked across the street to Linda's front door. It was time for a direct conversation. Linda answered the door wearing yoga pants and a tank top that probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly car payment. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, and she held a green smoothie that smelled like expensive health food stores. "Rebecca," Linda said with false brightness. "What a nice surprise. How are you settling in?" "I wanted to discuss some issues I've been having," Rebecca said evenly. "Package theft, property damage, false reports to code enforcement." Linda's expression didn't change, but Rebecca caught a slight tightening around her eyes. "How terrible. Have you called the police?" "I'm calling them next," Rebecca replied, holding up the manila folder containing her evidence. "But I thought it would be neighborly to give you a chance to explain first." "Explain what?" Rebecca opened the folder and showed Linda a printed screenshot of her taking the package from Rebecca's porch. "This was taken 2 days ago at 3:47 p.m. For a moment, Linda's mask slipped entirely. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. But she recovered quickly, her expression shifting to one of wounded innocence. "I was doing you a favor," Linda said, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "I saw the package sitting there for hours. In this neighborhood, we look out for each other. I was protecting it from theft by taking it to your house. I was going to bring it over when you got home from work. I know you work irregular hours." Rebecca felt her temper rising, but she kept her voice level. "The tracking shows it was delivered at 3:30. You took it 17 minutes later. That's not protecting it from theft. That is theft." Linda's smoothie glass hit the door frame, with enough force to splash green liquid onto the white paint. "How dare you accuse me of stealing? I've lived on this street for 15 years. I've served on the city planning committee and the library board. My husband is a respected attorney, and I've done nothing but try to help maintain property values in this neighborhood. By vandalizing my property and filing false reports?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," Linda snapped, but her voice was getting shrill. "If you're having problems with vandalism, maybe you should consider why. People don't appreciate when newcomers come in and disrupt established communities." Rebecca stared at her, finally understanding the full scope of what she was dealing with. Linda wasn't just a controlling neighbor or an HOA wannabe. She was someone who genuinely believed she had the right to determine who belonged in her neighborhood and who didn't. "I see," Rebecca said quietly. "Well, just so we're clear, I'm not going anywhere. I bought this house legally, I pay my taxes, and I have every right to live here without harassment." Linda's face twisted into something ugly. "We'll see about that." Rebecca turned to leave, but Linda called after her. "You have no idea who you're messing with, little nurse. Some people aren't cut out for this neighborhood. Maybe you should consider moving somewhere more suitable." The threat was clear, and for the first time, Rebecca felt genuinely afraid. Not of Linda personally, but of what someone with that level of entitlement and vindictiveness might be capable of. That fear was justified. Thursday night, Rebecca was pulling a double shift at the hospital when her motion sensors went crazy. Her phone buzzed with alert after alert, and when she checked the camera feed during her break, her heart sank. Linda wasn't alone this time. She'd brought what looked like her teenage son, a tall, lanky kid who kept looking nervously at the street while his mother directed him around Rebecca's yard. Together, they were systematically destroying everything Rebecca had planted. Her cactus garden was being ripped out of the ground and thrown into a garbage bag. Linda's son stomped on the larger plants while Linda herself used garden shears to cut down the flowering bushes Rebecca had planted along the front border of her property. But the worst part was what came next. After destroying the landscaping, Linda pulled out a spray bottle and began coating Rebecca's front porch, windows, and door with some kind of liquid. Even through the grainy night vision camera, Rebecca could see it was thick and dark. When Linda moved closer to the porch light, Rebecca could make out what it was. Honey. Linda was coating Rebecca's entryway with honey, ensuring that every ant, wasp, and bee in the neighborhood would be drawn to her front door. Rebecca took screenshots and saved the video, but she felt sick. This wasn't vandalism anymore. It was psychological warfare designed to make her home uninhabitable. Linda had escalated beyond petty harassment to actively dangerous behavior. At 6 a.m., when Rebecca finally made it home, the damage was worse than the cameras had shown. Her entire front yard looked like a war zone. Months of careful gardening were destroyed, her porch was thick with insects drawn by the honey, and someone had spray-painted "Unwanted" across her front door in dripping red letters. Rebecca stood in her driveway, too tired and too angry to cry. This had to stop. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "I need to report vandalism and threats," she told the dispatcher, "and I have video evidence of who did it." Officer Janet Williams arrived 20 minutes later, her patrol car drawing. Curious looks from neighbors who were starting their morning routines. Rebecca watched from her devastated front yard as Linda's curtains twitched, knowing the woman was cataloging every detail of the police visit. Officer Williams was younger than Rebecca had expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and an efficient manner that suggested she'd seen plenty of neighborhood disputes. She surveyed the damage with professional detachment, taking photos and notes while Rebecca walked her through the timeline of harassment. "This is extensive," Williams said, examining the spray-painted door. "When did you first notice problems? With this neighbor?" "The day I moved in," Rebecca replied, then caught herself. "Actually, let me start from the beginning and show you everything I've documented." Back inside her house, Rebecca opened her laptop and walked Officer Williams through 3 weeks of surveillance footage. They watched Linda's midnight sabotage, runs, the package theft, and finally the devastating attack from the night before. Williams leaned forward as they watched Linda directing her son to destroy the landscaping. "Is this the first time she's involved someone else?" "Yes, but I'm worried about escalation. She threatened me directly yesterday when I confronted her about the package theft." "What exactly did she say?" Rebecca consulted her notes. "She said, 'I had no idea who I was messing with, and that some people aren't cut out for this neighborhood. She suggested I should move somewhere more suitable.'" Williams made more notes. "Have you filed any other reports? Code enforcement? Postal service?" "Filed a mail theft complaint with the postal inspector 2 days ago. Code enforcement has been out here 3 times for complaints she filed, but they've all been dismissed as unfounded." "Good, the more documentation the better." Williams closed her notebook. "Here's what I can do immediately. This level of property damage qualifies as criminal mischief in the 2nd degree, which is a misdemeanor. The threats could be considered harassment. Combined with the mail theft, we're looking at multiple charges." Rebecca felt a surge of hope. "So, you'll arrest her?" "Not yet. I need to interview her first, and the prosecutor will want to review all the evidence. But this is definitely criminal behavior, not just a civil dispute." Williams stood up. "In the meantime, I strongly recommend you document everything. Keep those cameras running, save all the footage, and call us immediately if there's any more vandalism or if she approaches you directly." After Officer Williams left, Rebecca spent the morning cleaning honey off her porch and trying to salvage what remained of her plants. Most of the cacti were beyond saving, their root systems damaged and their flesh torn. But as she worked, she felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. For the first time since moving to Paradise Drive, someone in authority had taken her seriously. That afternoon, Rebecca's phone rang. The caller ID showed her brother Marcus. "Becca, what the hell is going on? Mom just called me crying, saying she saw something on social media about you and vandalism." Rebecca sighed. She'd forgotten that news traveled fast in small communities, and several neighbors had probably posted about the police car on local Facebook groups. "It's my neighbor from hell," Rebecca explained. "The blonde woman I told you about. She's been escalating her harassment campaign." "The one who complained about my existence?" "That's her, Linda Hoffman. Marcus, she spray-painted. My door and destroyed my garden. She's completely unhinged. There was a long pause. I'm driving down this weekend. You don't need to. Like hell I don't. Nobody messes with my sister. Rebecca was about to argue when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole she saw Tom Rodriguez, the firefighter from down the street, holding what looked like a casserole dish. Marcus, I have to go. A neighbor's here. Good neighbor or psycho neighbor? Good one, I think. Tom was standing on her porch with his wife, Maria, both of them looking concerned. Maria held a covered dish that smelled like enchiladas. We heard what happened, Tom said without preamble. Saw the police car this morning. Linda finally crossed a line, huh? You could say that. Rebecca gestured at her destroyed yard. She really went all out this time. Maria shook her head in disgust. That woman is a menace. We've been talking to other neighbors, and you're not the first person she's targeted. Remember the Johnsons, who lived in your house before you? Rebecca shook her head. Nice young couple with a baby, Tom continued. Linda called CPS on them twice, claiming they were neglecting their kid. Completely false, but they had to deal with investigations, home visits, the whole nightmare. They moved out after 8 months. CPS? Rebecca felt cold. She called child. Protective services? That's Linda's pattern, Maria said. She picks one house on the street and makes their lives miserable until they leave. Then she's sweet as pie until the next family moves in. Tom nodded grimly. The Johnsons kept quiet about it, but they warned us before they left, said Linda. Had some kind of obsession with controlling who lived on this street. Rebecca invited them in, and over the next hour she learned that Linda's reign of terror had been going on for years. The previous targets had all been young families or single people who Linda deemed unsuitable for various reasons. Some were too loud, others didn't maintain their yards to her standards, and a few had simply committed the sin of being different from Linda's narrow vision of appropriate neighbors. Why doesn't anyone fight back? Rebecca asked. Tom and Maria exchanged glances. Most people can't afford to, Maria admitted. Fighting someone like Linda takes time, money, and documentation. She's got resources and connections. Her husband, really, is a lawyer, and she's tight with half the city council. Plus, Tom added, she's smart about it. She never does anything obviously illegal until someone really pushes back. You challenging her directly probably triggered this escalation. Rebecca felt a chill. So I made it worse. No, Maria said firmly. You stood up to a bully. That's never wrong. And honestly, it's about time someone with enough backbone to fight her moved onto this street. After Tom and Maria left, Rebecca sat in her kitchen eating enchiladas and thinking about what she'd learned. Linda wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a predator who systematically drove people from their homes. The Johnsons, probably other families before them, had all been victims of what amounted to domestic terrorism. But Rebecca had something the previous targets apparently hadn't: a career that had taught her how to navigate complex systems, the technical skills to document everything, and, most importantly, the sheer stubborn determination that came from finally having something worth fighting for. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. Rebecca opened her laptop and found a message from an address she didn't recognize. Neighborhood Watch C123 Proton Mail Com. The subject line read, "You're not alone." Inside was a message from Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman down the street. Tom Rodriguez gave me your email. I may be old, but I'm not blind. I've been watching Linda Hoffman terrorize this street for 5 years. If you're really going to fight her, I have security footage you might find useful. Call me. Rebecca stared at the screen, then reached for her phone. Maybe Linda had picked the wrong neighborhood to terrorize this time. Maybe she'd finally met her match. Mrs. Chen's house was a time capsule from the 1970s, complete with shag carpeting and wood-paneled walls, but her security system was thoroughly modern. A professional-grade setup with cameras covering every angle of her property and most of the street. My late husband was a retired police detective," Mrs. Chen explained as she led Rebecca to a small office filled with monitors. "When these Ring doorbells and wireless cameras became popular, I decided to upgrade. Living alone, you never know when you might need evidence of something." Rebecca watched in amazement as Mrs. Chen pulled up footage spanning the past 2 years. The elderly woman had documented Linda's harassment campaigns against 3 different families, including the Johnsons. "Linda's very careful," Mrs. Chen said, fast-forwarding through hours of footage. "She usually strikes between midnight and 4 a.m. when most people are asleep, but she has patterns." The patterns were disturbing. Linda would begin each campaign with subtle provocations, moving trash cans, filing noise complaints, confronting targets about minor violations. If the family pushed back or ignored her, she escalated to property damage and threats. If they tried to placate her, she interpreted it as weakness and escalated anyway. "The Johnsons tried to be nice," Mrs. Chen said sadly. "They replanted their front yard with flowers Linda approved of, kept their baby inside during quiet hours, even invited her to a barbecue. She called CPS the next week, claiming the baby was crying too much and the parents must be abusive." Rebecca felt sick. How did she know they wouldn't fight back? Research. Linda studies people. She finds out where they work, what their financial situation is, whether they have family support. She's very good at identifying targets who can't afford extended legal battles. Mrs. Chen clicked to another file. "But you're different. You documented everything from the beginning. You have professional credentials that give you credibility, and you didn't try to appease her. That's why she escalated so quickly to direct destruction." "She's trying to break me before I can build a case." "Exactly. But Linda made a mistake this time. She involved her son, and she did it in view of multiple cameras." Mrs. Chen pulled up footage from the night of the garden destruction, but from a different angle than Rebecca's cameras. This view showed Linda's son carrying a can of spray paint and clearly showed Linda directing him to vandalize Rebecca's door. "The boy is 17, Mrs. Chen said, "old enough to be charged as an adult for vandalism. Linda's not just looking at misdemeanor charges anymore. She's looking at contributing to the delinquency of a minor and conspiracy charges." Rebecca stared at the screen. "Would you be willing to provide this footage to the police?" "I've been waiting 5 years for someone to ask." That afternoon, Rebecca called Officer Williams and arranged to meet at the police station. Mrs. Chen came with her, bringing a thumb drive containing 2 years of surveillance footage and a detailed timeline of Linda's harassment campaigns. "Officer," Williams reviewed the evidence with growing interest. "This establishes a clear pattern of predatory behavior. Combined with your footage and the postal inspector's investigation, we have grounds for multiple felony charges." "What happens next?" Rebecca asked. "I'll present this to the prosecutor. Tomorrow. Given the scope of the evidence and the escalating nature of the crimes, I expect they'll approve arrest warrants within the week." Rebecca felt a surge of satisfaction, but Williams wasn't finished. "However," the officer continued, "I need to warn you that Linda will probably figure out we're building a case. Her husband's a lawyer, and she's got connections in city government. She might try to intimidate you or escalate her harassment before we can make arrests." "What should I do?" "Document everything. Avoid confrontations and call us immediately if she approaches you or your property. And consider staying somewhere else for a few days if possible." Rebecca shook her head. "I'm not running from my own home." Williams nodded approvingly. "Then be extra careful. People like Linda don't go down quietly." That evening, Rebecca was reviewing security footage on her laptop when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Marcus standing on her porch with 2 large duffel bags and a grim expression. "Told you I was coming," he said when she opened the door. "Figured you could use backup." Rebecca had never been so glad to see her brother. Marcus was 6 feet tall, built like the college linebacker he'd once been, and had inherited their father's protective instincts. More importantly, he was a licensed private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud cases. "Show me everything," Marcus said, dropping his bags in the living room. They spent the next 3 hours going through Rebecca's evidence files. Marcus examined each video with professional interest, making notes and asking detailed questions about timestamps and camera angles. "This is solid work, Becca," he said finally. "But you're missing something important. Linda's not acting alone. She's got a network. The fake neighborhood committee, the coordinated code enforcement complaints, the city council connections. This is organized harassment." "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled up Linda's social media profiles on his laptop. "Look at this. She's admin of 3 different neighborhood Facebook groups, serves on the city's planning committee, and volunteers with the mayor's office. She's not just some crazy neighbor, she's politically connected." Rebecca leaned over his shoulder, studying Linda's online presence. The woman had hundreds of connections throughout the city government, real estate industry, and local business community. "She's been using these connections to file complaints against her targets," Marcus continued. "Code enforcement, zoning violations, noise complaints. She's weaponizing city services against people she doesn't like." "That's corruption." "Exactly. And it's probably illegal. If we can prove she's been abusing her government connections for personal vendettas, she's looking at much more serious charges." Rebecca felt a new kind of hope building. For weeks, she'd been fighting a defensive battle, simply trying to document Linda's attacks. But Marcus was right. They had enough evidence. To go on the offensive, what do we do? Tomorrow, I start making phone calls. The postal inspector, the FBI Public Corruption Unit, maybe even the State Attorney General's office. Linda Hoffman picked the wrong target this time. That night, Rebecca slept better than she had in weeks. But across the street, Linda was making phone calls of her own. She'd noticed the strange car in Rebecca's driveway and the extra lights on in the house. Something was happening, and Linda Hoffman didn't like surprises. The next morning brought the first sign that Linda was preparing for war. Rebecca's doorbell rang at 7 a.m., followed immediately by insistent knocking. Through the peephole, she saw 2 men in suits standing on her porch. "Ms. Martinez," one of them called. "We're with code enforcement. We need to discuss some violations." Rebecca opened the door with the chain still attached. "I'd like to see your identification. Please." Both men held up city badges that looked official. The older one, a heavy-set man with thinning hair, consulted a clipboard. "We've received multiple complaints about your property. Improper landscaping, vehicle violations, and noise disturbances. We need to conduct an immediate inspection." "I've already been inspected twice," Rebecca said. "All complaints were dismissed as unfounded." "These are new complaints," the younger man said. "Filed yesterday by multiple residents. We're required to investigate." Rebecca felt her anger rising. Linda was using her government connections to send official harassment. But before she could respond, Marcus appeared behind her. "What department are you with?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with officials. "City Code Enforcement," the older man replied, but his confidence seemed to waver slightly. "Badge numbers and names, please," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "I'll need to verify your credentials with your supervisor." The 2 men exchanged glances. The younger one stepped forward. "Sir, we're conducting a routine inspection. There's no need for—" "There's every need," Marcus interrupted. "This property has been subject to multiple false complaints, and we're documenting all official contacts. Badge numbers, please." After a tense moment, both men provided their information. Marcus made a show of photographing their badges and calling someone on his phone. "City Code Enforcement? I need to verify that Officers Johnson and Martinez are conducting authorized inspections today." He paused, listening. "I see. And these complaints were filed by whom?" Rebecca watched the officers' faces grow increasingly uncomfortable as Marcus continued his call. "Interesting," Marcus said finally. My contact says there were indeed multiple complaints filed yesterday, all by the same person using different names and addresses. That sounds like filing false reports, which is a misdemeanor." The older officer cleared his throat. "We'll need to reschedule this inspection pending review of the complaints." After they left, Rebecca turned to Marcus with admiration. "How did you know they were fake?" "I didn't, but their body language was wrong. Real code enforcement officers don't get nervous when you ask for badge numbers. These guys were probably legitimate officers, but they were being used to intimidate you based on Linda's false reports. So what now? Now we document everything and add it to our case. Linda just made another mistake, using government employees. For personal harassment is a federal crime." That afternoon, Marcus drove to City Hall while Rebecca was at work. He spent 3 hours filing public records requests, demanding copies of all code enforcement complaints filed against Paradise Drive addresses in the past 2 years. He also requested personnel records for Linda's volunteer positions and documentation of her committee appointments. The clerk who processed his requests was a tired-looking woman named Sandra, who seemed sympathetic to his cause. "You're investigating Linda Hoffman?" Sandra asked quietly. "Off the record, she's been a problem for years. She files more complaints than the rest of the city combined, and she's got friends in high places who make sure her reports get priority attention." "Is that legal?" Sandra shrugged. "Technically, yes, but morally, she's been abusing the system to harass people she doesn't like. A lot of us have been waiting for someone to call her on it." By evening, Marcus had compiled a damning paper trail. Linda had filed over 50 complaints in 2 years, targeting only 6 addresses, all on Paradise Drive. The complaints ranged from noise violations to zoning infractions to animal control issues. Most were dismissed as unfounded, but they still required official responses that cost the city time and money. "She's been using taxpayer resources to conduct personal vendettas," Marcus told Rebecca over dinner. "That's fraud, abuse of office, and conspiracy. We're not just talking about neighborhood harassment anymore. We're talking about public corruption." Rebecca stared at the documents spread across her kitchen table. How has she gotten away with this for so long? Because her previous targets didn't have the resources to fight back, and city employees didn't want to confront someone with political connections. But that changes now. Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and smiled. "It's my contact at the FBI." Rebecca listened as Marcus explained their evidence to someone named Agent Torres. The conversation was lengthy and detailed, with Marcus providing case numbers, file references, and specific dates. "They're interested," Marcus said after hanging up. "Very interested. Agent Torres is opening a preliminary investigation into Linda's abuse of city services. If they can prove she's been using her volunteer positions to file false reports, she could be looking at federal charges." That night, Rebecca lay in bed feeling something she hadn't experienced since moving to Paradise Drive: genuine optimism. Linda had built her harassment campaigns on the assumption that her targets would be isolated, intimidated, and unable to fight back effectively. She'd been wrong on all counts. But across the street, Linda Hoffman was far from finished. She'd spent years perfecting her system of neighborhood control, and she wasn't about to let one stubborn nurse destroy everything she'd built. The real war was just beginning. The first sign that Linda had declared a total war came at 3 a.m. on Thursday morning. Rebecca's security cameras captured everything. Linda's teenage son spray-painting obscenities across Rebecca's garage door while Linda herself stood watch from the street. But this time, they weren't alone. A third figure emerged. From the shadows, Linda's husband, Robert Hoffman. Rebecca had never seen him before, but there was no mistaking the tall, silver-haired man in expensive casual wear who handed his son another can of paint and pointed toward Rebecca's car. "She brought in the whole family," Marcus muttered, reviewing the footage over coffee the next morning. "That's desperation." But the vandalism was just the opening move. By noon, Rebecca had received calls from her mortgage company asking about concerns regarding property maintenance, her car insurance agent inquiring about reports of vehicle damage, and, most disturbingly, the HR department at Children's Medical Center. "Rebecca, this is awkward," said Janet from HR, her voice carefully neutral. "We've received some concerning calls about your living situation. Something about neighborhood disturbances and police involvement?" Rebecca's blood ran cold. "What kind of calls?" "Anonymous reports claiming you're involved in ongoing criminal activity. Normally, we'd ignore this type of thing, but the caller claimed to be a concerned neighbor with documentation. Janet, I'm the victim here. I've been documenting harassment from a neighbor for weeks. The police are investigating her, not me." "I believe you, Rebecca. Your work record speaks for itself, but administration is asking questions, and I wanted to give you a heads up. Can you provide some documentation of what's really happening?" After Rebecca hung up, she turned to Marcus with growing panic. "She's trying to destroy my career." "Standard playbook for someone like Linda," Marcus replied, grimly. "When legal harassment doesn't work, they go after your livelihood. She's probably called everyone she can think of. Your bank, your insurance, your employer, maybe even your licensing board." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Professional nurses maintain professional living situations. Perhaps it's time to reconsider your housing choices." "That's it," Rebecca said, showing Marcus the message. She just made a direct threat in writing. Marcus smiled for the first time all morning. And she sent it from her personal phone. Linda's getting sloppy. That afternoon, Officer Williams arrived with news that changed everything. "The prosecutor approved arrest warrants this morning," she announced. "Linda Hoffman, her husband Robert, and their son Tyler are all being charged. Linda's facing felony harassment, mail theft, filing false reports, and conspiracy. Robert and Tyler are looking at vandalism and conspiracy charges." Rebecca felt a surge of vindication, but Williams wasn't finished. "However, we need to execute the warrants carefully. Linda's husband is an attorney, and they've retained high-end criminal defense counsel. They're going to fight every charge, and they'll probably try to discredit you as a witness." "How?" "By claiming you're an unstable neighbor who's been harassing them. I've seen this strategy before. Wealthy defendants try to flip the narrative and make themselves the victims." Marcus leaned forward. "What about the federal investigation?" "Agent Torres is coordinating with us. The FBI wants to execute their own search warrant simultaneously when we make the arrests. They're particularly interested in Linda's computer and phone records." Williams pulled out a schedule. "We're planning the arrest for tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I need you both to be available as witnesses, but stay away from the area until we give you the all-clear." That evening, Rebecca tried to focus on normal activities: laundry, meal prep, catching up on medical journals, but she couldn't concentrate. Tomorrow, Linda Hoffman would finally face consequences for months of escalating harassment. At 11 p.m., Rebecca's security cameras detected movement in her front yard. She opened the app expecting to see Linda's familiar figure, but instead found Tyler Hoffman and two other teenagers she didn't recognize. They were carrying what looked like buckets and bags. "Marcus," Rebecca called urgently. "They're back, and they brought friends." They watched in real time as the teenagers systematically vandalized Rebecca's property with a level of destruction that made previous attacks look like pranks. They poured motor oil across her driveway, scattered garbage throughout her yard, and used bolt cutters to destroy her mailbox. But the worst part came when Tyler produced a bottle of what looked like bleach and began pouring it on the remnants of Rebecca's garden, ensuring that nothing would ever grow there again. "They're trying to do maximum damage before the arrests," Marcus said, already dialing 911. "Linda knows this is her last chance." Police arrived within minutes, but the teenagers had vanished. Officer Williams surveyed the damage with professional anger. "This is escalation beyond anything I've seen in neighborhood disputes," she said. The destruction is so extensive it might qualify as a hate crime. Rebecca stared at her ruined property. Oil stains covered her driveway, her mailbox lay twisted in the street, and the chemical smell from the bleached earth made her eyes water. "Will this affect tomorrow's arrests?" she asked. "It'll strengthen our case," Williams replied. "Linda just demonstrated that she's willing to involve minors in serious criminal activity. The prosecutor will add charges." The next morning, Rebecca and Marcus positioned themselves at a coffee shop 6 blocks away, waiting for the all-clear call. At exactly 6 a.m., Rebecca's security camera showed a coordinated operation that looked like something from a police drama. 3 patrol cars, 2 FBI vehicles, and an unmarked van converged on Paradise Drive simultaneously. Officers surrounded Linda's house while federal agents executed search warrants. Rebecca watched on her phone as Linda emerged in handcuffs, her perfect blonde hair disheveled and her face twisted with rage. Robert Hoffman appeared next, already on his phone with what was probably their attorney. Tyler was led out separately, looking young and scared without his mother's influence. But the most satisfying moment came when Agent Torres emerged from Linda's house carrying several boxes of evidence: computers, phones, and what looked like filing cabinets full of documents. How much evidence were they hiding? Marcus wondered aloud. Rebecca's phone rang. Officer Williams sounded exhausted but satisfied. "All 3 are in custody." FBI found extensive documentation of Linda's harassment campaigns, including detailed files on every family she's targeted. She kept records like it was a hobby. What kind of records? Financial information, employment details, family schedules, even medical records somehow. Linda's been conducting surveillance operations on her neighbors for years. Rebecca felt cold. Medical records? How? Still investigating, but it looks like she had connections at various clinics and hospitals. This is much bigger than neighborhood harassment. We're looking at identity theft, medical privacy violations, and possibly insurance fraud. An hour later, Rebecca and Marcus returned to Paradise Drive to find a transformed street. News vans lined the block, reporters interviewed neighbors, and crime scene tapes surrounded Linda's house. The story had gone viral on social media. Suburban Karen arrested for years-long harassment campaign. Mrs. Chen appeared at Rebecca's side, looking satisfied. 15 years I've been waiting for this day, she said. Linda Hoffman finally picked on someone who could fight back. But as Rebecca surveyed the media circus and the ongoing investigation, she realized this was far from over. Linda might be in custody, but her network of connections remained intact. The legal battle would probably take months, and people like Linda didn't accept defeat quietly. Still, for the first time since moving to Paradise Drive, Rebecca felt like she was winning. The neighborhood's reign of terror was finally coming to an end. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early December, nearly 2 months after the arrests. Rebecca had spent those weeks documenting additional incidents, working with prosecutors and trying to repair her vandalized property. The oil stains on her driveway were permanent, but she'd replanted her garden with native desert plants that seemed determined to thrive despite the poisoned soil. The courtroom was packed. Linda sat at the defendant's table with 3 expensive attorneys, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her outfit carefully chosen to project respectability. She looked nothing like the woman Rebecca's cameras had captured vandalizing property. In the middle of the night, Robert and Tyler Hoffman sat with their own legal teams, creating an impressive wall of suits and briefcases that probably cost more than Rebecca's annual salary. But Rebecca had something they didn't: the truth, meticulously documented and backed by months of evidence. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Kim had been thorough in her preparation. She presented the case like a prosecutor who'd been waiting her entire career for something this clear-cut. "Your Honor," Kim began, "the evidence will show that Linda Hoffman conducted a systematic campaign of harassment, vandalism, and intimidation against her neighbors spanning multiple years. She weaponized city services, violated federal laws, regarding mail theft and ultimately escalated to coordinating criminal destruction of property involving minors. Linda's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Peterson, who probably charged $1,000 an hour, stood to respond. "Your Honor, my client is a respected community volunteer who has served this city for over 15 years. Mrs. Hoffman is the victim of a malicious prosecution based on the complaints of a neighbor who has repeatedly violated community standards and refused to integrate into an established neighborhood." Rebecca felt her anger rising. Even now, Linda was trying to paint herself as the victim. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Prosecutor Kim methodically presented video evidence, documented complaints, and testimony from multiple neighbors. Mrs. Chen testified about watching Linda's harassment campaigns for years. Tom and Maria Rodriguez described the pattern of targeting that drove previous families from the neighborhood. But the most damaging testimony came from Agent Torres, who detailed what the FBI had found in Linda's house. Mrs. Hoffman maintained extensive files on 13 different neighbors over a 5-year period, Torres testified. These files contained personal financial information, medical records, employment details, and what appeared to be surveillance logs documenting their daily routines. "How did she obtain this information?" Prosecutor Kim asked. "Through a network of contacts in various city departments, medical facilities, and financial institutions." Mrs. Hoffman used her volunteer positions and social connections to access confidential information, which she then used to target individuals she deemed unsuitable for her neighborhood. The defense tried to argue that Linda was simply a concerned citizen documenting community problems, but the evidence was overwhelming. The videos showed clear criminal activity. The false reports to code enforcement were documented. The mail theft was captured on multiple cameras. When Linda finally took the stand in her own defense, Rebecca watched a master manipulator at work. "I've lived on Paradise Drive for 15 years, Linda testified, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I've watched this neighborhood deteriorate as property values declined and undesirable elements moved in. I was simply trying to maintain community standards." "What do you mean by undesirable elements?" Peterson asked. "Renters instead of homeowners, people who don't maintain their properties, individuals who don't share our community values." Rebecca felt sick listening to Linda's coded language. She was essentially admitting to discriminatory harassment while trying to make it sound like civic duty. But Prosecutor Kim was ready for cross-examination. "Mrs. Hoffman, you testified about maintaining community standards. Is spray painting a neighbor's door part of those standards?" "I never spray painted anything." Kim played video footage of Linda directing her son to vandalize Rebecca's door. "Is this you in the video, Mrs. Hoffman?" Linda's composure cracked slightly. "I was trying to protect my son from making a mistake." "By telling him where to spray paint?" "You're taking this out of context." Kim moved to mail theft. "You testified about community values. Do those values include taking packages from neighbors?" "Porches." "I was protecting those packages from theft. By taking them to your house and not returning them? I intended to return them." "For 3 days." The cross-examination continued for 2 hours. Kim systematically dismantled every excuse, every rationalization, every attempt to justify Linda's behavior. By the end, Linda was red-faced and stammering, her mask of respectability completely gone. During a recess, Rebecca found herself face-to-face with Linda in the courthouse hallway. Linda's attorneys were huddled nearby, but for a moment, the two women were alone. "You have no idea what you've done," Linda hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I've lived on that street for 15 years. I built that community. People like you don't belong there." "People like me?" Rebecca replied calmly. "You mean nurses, homeowners, people who mind their own business?" "You know exactly what I mean." Rebecca stared at Linda for a long moment, finally understanding the full scope of what she'd been fighting. This wasn't just about property values or neighborhood standards. Linda's harassment campaigns were about control, power, and her twisted belief that she had the right to determine who deserved to live where. "I belong there because I bought a house and pay my mortgage," Rebecca said quietly. "You belong in jail because you committed crimes. The difference is that I earned my place while you're about to lose yours." Linda's face twisted with rage, but before she could respond, her attorneys pulled her away. When court reconvened, Judge Martinez rendered her decision. "I have rarely seen such clear-cut evidence of systematic harassment and criminal conspiracy," the judge said. "Mrs. Hoffman, your actions constitute a deliberate campaign to drive law-abiding citizens from their homes through intimidation, property destruction, and abuse of governmental systems." Linda was bound over for trial on all charges. Her bail was set at $50,000, with conditions that included no contact with Rebecca and no unsupervised access to Paradise Drive. Robert and Tyler Hoffman pled guilty to reduced charges, in exchange for testifying against Linda and agreeing to pay full restitution for property damage. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca was surrounded by reporters asking about her experience and her advice for other harassment victims. "Document everything," she said simply. "Take pictures, save videos, keep records. Bullies count on their victims being too intimidated or too isolated to fight back. But when you have evidence and support, even the worst neighbors can be held accountable." That evening, Rebecca returned to Paradise Drive to find a small celebration happening on her front lawn. Tom and Maria Rodriguez had organized a block party, and neighbors who had never spoken to her before were bringing food and expressing gratitude for finally ending Linda's reign of terror. Mrs. Chen approached with a wrapped gift. "I wanted to give you this," she said, handing Rebecca a small package. Inside was a hand-carved wooden sign that read, "Home is where you plant your garden and defend your right to grow." Rebecca felt tears in her eyes. For the first time since moving to Paradise Drive, she truly felt like she belonged. Across the street, Linda's house sat empty, dark windows reflecting the warm lights and laughter from Rebecca's yard. The woman who had tried to decide who deserved to live on Paradise Drive was gone, while the community she'd tried to destroy was finally healing. 6 months later, Rebecca stood in her front yard surveying the most beautiful garden she'd ever grown. The desert plants she'd chosen after Linda's destruction had not only survived, but thrived, creating a landscape that was both stunning and perfectly suited to Arizona's climate. Barrel cacti bloomed with bright yellow flowers, palo verde trees provided shade, and ocotillo plants reached toward the sky like natural sculptures. The transformation wasn't just in her yard. Paradise Drive had become the neighborhood it was always meant to be, a place where people looked out for each other instead of hunting for violations to report. Rebecca's doorbell rang, interrupting her morning watering routine. Through the peephole, she saw a young woman with a baby stroller looking nervous but determined. "Hi," the woman said when Rebecca opened the door. "I'm Amanda Walsh. My husband and I just bought the Hoffman house. I hope that's not weird, but I wanted to introduce myself." Rebecca smiled, remembering her own first day on Paradise Drive and how different this welcome was from Linda's interrogation. "Not weird at all. I'm Rebecca Martinez. Welcome to the neighborhood." "I have to ask," Amanda said hesitantly. "We heard about what happened with the previous owners. The realtor told us some of it, but neighbors have been filling in details. Was it really as bad as everyone says?" Rebecca glanced across the street at the house where Linda had orchestrated months of harassment. New owners had painted it a warm, yellow instead of stark white, planted colorful flower boxes under the windows, and hung a swing from the old oak tree in the front yard. "It was pretty bad," Rebecca admitted. "But it's over now. How are you finding the neighborhood?" "Everyone's been incredibly welcoming," Amanda said, her face lighting up. "Mrs. Chen brought us cookies. Tom Rodriguez helped my husband install our security system, and at least 6 people have offered to babysit when we need it." Rebecca wasn't surprised. Linda's absence had allowed the street's natural community spirit to emerge. Without someone constantly filing complaints and stirring up conflicts, neighbors had rediscovered what they liked about each other. "Security system?" Rebecca asked. Amanda laughed. "Probably overkill, but after hearing about Linda Hoffman, we wanted to be prepared. Though honestly, the scariest thing we've encountered so far is Mrs. Chen's cat, and he's just fat and lazy." They chatted for a few more minutes about neighborhood logistics, the best places for groceries, reliable contractors, and the informal schedule for street cleanup days that had emerged organically after Linda's arrest. After Amanda left, Rebecca checked her phone and found a message from Prosecutor Kim. "Sentencing hearing scheduled for next Tuesday. Thought you'd want to know." Linda's trial had concluded 3 weeks earlier with guilty verdicts on all major charges. The evidence had been so overwhelming that even her expensive attorneys couldn't create reasonable doubt. Linda faced up to 5 years in prison, though she'd probably serve less with good behavior. Robert Hoffman had received probation and community service as part of his plea deal, while Tyler was sentenced to juvenile detention and counseling. The family had lost their house to pay legal fees and restitution, effectively ending their connection to Paradise Drive forever. But for Rebecca, the most satisfying outcome had been the FBI's broader investigation. Agent Torres had discovered that Linda's network of informants in city government and healthcare facilities had been providing her with confidential information for years. 7 people had been fired, 3 faced criminal charges, and the city had implemented new privacy protocols to prevent future abuse. Tuesday morning, Rebecca sat in the same courtroom where Linda's preliminary hearing had taken place. The scene was very different this time. Linda looked older, her blonde hair showing gray roots and her expensive clothes replaced by a standard orange jumpsuit. The army of attorneys was gone, replaced by a single public defender who looked like he was going through the motions. Judge Martinez reviewed the sentencing recommendations with professional detachment. "Mrs. Hoffman, you have been convicted of multiple felonies related to a systematic campaign of harassment that lasted several years and affected numerous victims. The court has received victim impact statements from 8 different families who were targeted by your actions." Rebecca had submitted her own statement, but she'd also encouraged other former neighbors to come forward. The Johnsons had written about the trauma of false CPS investigations. An elderly couple described how Linda's harassment had contributed to their decision to sell their home and move to a retirement community. A single mother detailed the stress of constantly worrying about what complaints Linda would file next. "Your actions," Judge Martinez continued, "represent a fundamental violation of the social contract that allows people to live peacefully in their communities. You used your connections and resources not to improve your neighborhood, but to terrorize anyone who didn't meet your arbitrary standards." Linda's attorney made a brief argument for leniency, citing her previous community service and health issues, but the judge was unmoved. "Linda Hoffman, you are sentenced to 3 years in state prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, and you are permanently barred from holding any volunteer positions with city government or serving on community boards." Rebecca watched Linda's face crumble as the reality of her situation hit home. The woman who had wielded power like a weapon for years was finally facing consequences she couldn't manipulate or escape. After the hearing, Rebecca walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than she had in months. The legal chapter of her ordeal was finally closed. That evening, she found Marcus waiting on her front porch with a bottle of champagne and a grin. "Thought we should celebrate," he said. 3 years is more than I expected." "It's not really about the prison time," Rebecca replied, accepting a glass of champagne. "It's about proving that bullies can be stopped when people fight back." They sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. Paradise Drive was quiet, except for the sound of children playing in the Rodriguez yard and someone practicing piano a few houses down. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked. Rebecca considered the question seriously. The fight against Linda had consumed months of her life, cost thousands of dollars in legal fees and property repairs, and subjected her to stress that had affected her work and health. "No," she said finally. "Someone had to stop her. If I hadn't fought back, she would have driven me out just like all the others, and then she would have started on the next family." "Think she'll cause trouble when she gets out?" Rebecca shook her head. Linda's power came from her connections and her reputation. She lost both. When she gets out of prison, she'll be a convicted felon with no political allies and no credibility. She'll have to find somewhere else to live and someone else to terrorize. Marcus raised his glass. "To new neighbors who know how to defend themselves." Rebecca clinked her glass against his, then looked across the street at Amanda Walsh's house. Through the front window she could see the young family having dinner together, safe in their home without fear of harassment or retaliation. "You know what the best part is," Rebecca said. "Linda spent years trying to control who belonged on this street, but in the end, the neighbors she tried to drive away are the ones who stayed, and she's the one who had to leave." A year later, Rebecca received an invitation that made her smile. Amanda and her husband were hosting a block party to celebrate their first anniversary on Paradise Drive, and the invitation specifically mentioned that it was being held in honor of the neighbor who made our streets safe for everyone. Rebecca walked across the street carrying a potted succulent as a housewarming gift, thinking about how different this gathering was from her first encounter with Linda Hoffman. The same street, the same houses, but an entirely different spirit. "Mrs." Chen waved from her lawn chair, where she was surrounded by neighborhood children fascinated by stories of her late husband's police career. Tom Rodriguez was manning a grill, cooking hamburgers and sharing firefighting tales with anyone who would listen. Maria had organized games for the kids, and even Rebecca's new next-door neighbors, an elderly couple from Minnesota, had emerged from their usual privacy to join the celebration. "Rebecca!" Amanda called out, hurrying over with her toddler in tow. "I'm so glad you could make it. David, this is Rebecca, the one I told you about." Amanda's husband, a soft-spoken man who worked as an engineer, shook Rebecca's hand warmly. "Amanda says you're the reason this neighborhood is so peaceful. Thank you for fighting back when someone else might have just moved away." "I didn't have anywhere else to go," Rebecca replied. "This is my home." And it truly was. Not because she'd won a legal battle or because a bully had been defeated, but because she'd learned that home isn't just a place you buy, it's a place you're willing to defend. As the evening progressed and neighbors shared stories, Rebecca realized that Linda's harassment campaign had ultimately failed in every way that mattered. Paradise Drive was more united than ever. Property values had actually increased after the negative publicity faded, and the community had developed a strength that came from having faced a common threat together. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the desert sky in brilliant colors. Children's laughter echoed down the street. Neighbors who had once barely spoken were making plans for future gatherings. Rebecca looked around at the scene and felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or justice. She'd planted her garden, defended her ground, and discovered that sometimes the best way to build a community is to stand up to those who try to tear it down. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Moving to Paradise. Drive next month. Heard about what happened with Linda Hoffman. Any advice for new neighbors?" Rebecca smiled and typed back. "Plant deep roots, document everything, and remember that bullies only win when good people stay silent." Welcome to the neighborhood. The cycle was complete. Paradise Drive had learned to protect itself, and Rebecca Martinez had found not just a home, but a community worth fighting for. Sometimes the strongest gardens grow in the hardest soil. Sometimes the best neighbors are the ones who refuse to let bullies win. And sometimes standing your ground is the first step to finding where you truly belong.